Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. I hope you had a nice weekend and you got some luck on the progressive summon chance. We are moving into sort of the first starting week of the Tormin Yuletide Titan Event. And today we have a special classic Arena Takedown. Now, I'm pretty sure they've done this like maybe once in the past before, where they've made a classic Arena Takedown where you have to win, specifically offense, not defense. You have to win with champions from the same faction. And this one we've got here is from the Shadowkin Faction. So what I thought would be quite good to do is to do a bit of a video breakdown in terms of how I would approach this from various different player states and what different options you have in terms of building teams. Now, you may be wondering and thinking, well, I can skip 500 snow points, so maybe I should just skip this and not deal with the hassle. Well, yes, that is true to some extent, but so far we have had a pretty hefty, I would say a pretty hefty start to this snow event in terms of requiring, 4,100. So essentially 8 sacred shards really to get the 200 points here. So it's 300 in total here. And this artifact enhancement is heavily inflated again. Most fusion events were at 4,775. They're asking you to go to 5,600, which is probably another 4 million silver, give or take. So it's a bit of a hefty thing. So in terms of what you can skip, like the champion trading is a 3-day event here. That's not so bad at 4,300 for the amount of time and the amount of points you get available to you. But it just goes to the fact that if you skip some of the summon rush, you really don't want to do that artifact enhancement. These snow points, the free 500 you have that you can skip, starts drying up very quickly. And we are only 3 or 4 days into this sort of 3-week event. So realistically, this type of takedown event, I would say if you've got some Shadowkin champions, try to get this done, because normally the point requirements are not too extreme and it doesn't cost you any energy or effort except for rebuilding a few champions. So that's why I want to do this video today, to give you some ideas of teams that you can build, some of the structures you can go with, some of the different options available, and also at the end I'm going to do a bit of a tier list breakdown of the best damage dealers from an AoE perspective that you can use from the Shadowkin, so we can rank them and you can kind of pick from the list of champions you have available. Now, when building an arena team, you kind of got to go 2 options here, because the Shadowkin faction has a lot of powerful champions, but not necessarily champions that fill all the roles that we normally look for in arena. Now, there are some obvious massive call outs here, some champions that I actually don't own, including Shuzhen the Valorous. If you have got Shuzhen the Valorous, she should be your arena team. In all honesty, she should have replaced your Arbiter by now, because Shuzhen the Valorant basically gives your unit a turn. With this Purging Petals ability, as long as you go first in your team, so you would move all of your speed gear from whomever is your fastest champion onto Shuzhen the Valorant, she will then target an ally. If that target is not under a sheep, she places increased attack, increased crit rate, and increased crit damage, then gives them a turn. And that is what makes her incredibly powerful. She basically can pick someone like a Gembo, a Genzin, an attack-based champion, Nogorio, whoever you want to use as your sort of attack-based champion. They go first, instantly get a turn, and then you can start sort of breaking through. Now, naturally, you will come up against the meta wall. When you're facing the Tarases and the Marichkas, you will struggle to fight those. So you kind of need to avoid those. The good thing is Classic Arena has just reset. So hopefully after a day, most of those people will be climbing up higher. So you can kind of like look for those one-man defenses, or look for teams more appropriate to what you're going to be able to do with this. Because to be honest, the number of sort of attack-based options in the Shadowkin that can even get close to being able to touch the Tarichka is very, very slim, very low. There are some defense-based options, but not many attack-based options. So if you're trying to fight the Platinum Arena meta, you're not going to do much of, it's not going to work. However, this should absolutely be your lead, because you also get a 30% aura. It's the only 30% speed aura in this faction. There are 20% and 19%, but nothing that is close to an Arbiter level. Another important shout out is obviously Harima. I don't have her, so she's not in my example teams, but she would go in your team as a go second stall tanky type team, where you just want her to start scaling her increased defense here. So she starts increasing the defense, and eventually she will start killing everyone. So Harima, if you've got her, would absolutely be in your team. You can see I do miss a couple of the really good champions in terms of damage dealers. Genzin would be very good, as is Tatsu for this ability here. she is an exceptionally good damage dealer in the Shadowkin faction only. Obviously, in the grand scheme of pictures, you wouldn't recommend using Tatsu, but when we're only looking at the Shadowkin, she probably comes up a little bit above Genbo purely because of her raw damage output. So you're really approaching it from a position of, do I have the champions available to do a speed team, which probably needs either a Lady Kimmy, a Shuzhen the Valorant, or a Yoshi. If you have one of those three champions, you can probably build a speed team of sorts. You can use the Yoshi passive, which means if an enemy places a buff, he gets a turn meter buff to try and interject, basically interrupt the turn meter flow. That is very good. If you build him as fast as you possibly can, and then he comes in and he will use his increased attack, increased accuracy. There isn't really any bomb champions in the Shadowkin, so we're really just using this to interrupt the turn meter flow. You can then probably bring a Lady Kimmy in as well. So this is an example team of how we would utilize Yoshi in a speed team. We're going to go Yoshi to activate the passive in a really fast build. Tomoe actually might be a hidden MVP for this contest because of this unique passive where she will increase all of the turn meter fill effects when she is sort of applying her effects on the Shadowkin faction. And she does do a pretty powerful A3 one-off where she'll place a counterattack on an ally for 2 turns. She also then fills all the allies' turn meters by 15%, places an increased crit damage buff and an increased crit rate buff if they're from the Shadowkin faction. So the turn meter fill would increase by 20%, making this an 18% turn meter fill. She also does have an AoE of her own, but she doesn't really hit too hard. Her base attack is incredibly low. Her aura's faction wars only, but you could use her as a boost into a double damage dealer. Now, from an AoE decreased defense option, there are not many options in the Shadowkin. There's basically Genzin, there is Michinaki, but apart from that, you are limited in options. So you could just go for a double savage, sort of double damage dealer to try and kill them off. Nagorio is exceptionally good for this. He has some pretty good multipliers. His damage is pretty good. He'll also self-buff increase attack as well, which is not bad. He's a great option as a secondary nuker. We also have, of course, the one that most people will go towards as a damage dealer. Genbo is really good because he gives you a lot of stats before you go into the fight. You get increased crit rate and increased crit damage. He also will ignore any sort of swift parry, unkillable. Very good into Leorius. He'll also decrease the duration of buffs as well as A2, which can't be resisted if he critically hits. And he has a steal on the A1, so he kind of is a bit annoying to fight against. He will one-shot things. He's just a little bit squishy and his damage isn't as good as it should be, but he's probably the one you will go to if you're looking for a damage dealer. He's also void, so he can't be weak hit. So that is an option of a speed team you can do. Now, if you have a Lady Kimmy, you can change this up a little bit. You can basically put all your speed gear into Lady Kimmy, go first and go into, like, again, a double boost into a drop defense. You know, Michinaki can either remove all the buffs or you can drop a debuff as well, decreased defense. So he's pretty good as like that utility decreased defense option, and then come in with a nuke on the Genbo. That is another way you can do a speed team. Now, if you don't have a Shuzhen or a Yoshi or a Kimmy, and you're thinking, how the hell am I going to be able to do this? Well, there are ways that you can go second and do various different things. You will need stone skin gear though. So for example, here's a way you can approach it. This would be with Kyoku being a lead. Now, what is good about Kyoku is she does the Seeker effect, where if she gets critically hit, she's going to heal allies and then place increased defense on them. So it's important that she is in the lead position so that when the damage comes in, this activates before the other allies take damage, reducing the damage they take because the increased defense buff will be on. If you put her last, all of the allies could die before she even activates her passive. So absolutely she should be first. And then when she does get a turn, if you build her in high resistance or if you build her in high damage, doesn't really matter. But if you build her in high resistance, you can get this sort of block damage protected, which means that you can't actually take any damage. That lets her take a few more turns and cycle around to her abilities. So you could set up a team like this, where you have Kyoku in the lead for that sort of increased defense effect. You also have Riho Bone Spear. She is here, this passive, where any debuff she receives for the first debuff sort of placement, she'll send them back instead. But mainly she's here for this cleanse heal. So if you do take any sort of stun debuffs, provoke artifact sets or hex or any of those things, she'll just basically cleanse them all off and heal them. And she does have some pretty good damage herself and lots of debuffs. You just got to be careful about polymorph. So in this situation here, this would be pretty tragic if I tried to use Riho into Mortu or the Ultimate Death Knight, because there's a good chance that that A2 will cause her to become a sheep. Then we have two defense-based options, because make sure you prioritize the right type of damage dealer. We've got Michinaki. He is defense based, so would need a defense buff, which is why you pair it with Kyoku. She basically gives a damage boost as well as protection. And then Masamoto as well is pretty good from an AoE perspective. He also has a secondary fill as well. He is a decent damage dealer, albeit a little bit low, but could do a job for you here. Finally, taking the same example, if you wanted to try and create like a hybrid mix where you wanted to go second, but still wanted an attack-based champion, well, you could go with still having Kyoku in the lead, so you have that sort of layer protection. You could have Riho still as well, so that you have a cleanse if you need it for whatever reason. But what you will have to do here is invest much more into Stone Skin. You will probably need to make a Stone Skin Gembo so that he at least gets a turn. You will also need to probably make a Stone Skin Sachi. Now, the reason why we're using Sachi here, she has an increased attack buff, which we don't have in anyone else. So Gembo will give himself increased crit rate and increased crit damage, but he will not give himself increased attack. And if you don't have the attack buff, you're not going to be killing anyone. So you need Sachi here. She also has a 20% fill if she critically hits, so this is quite ideal. She also has a revive, so if she kills someone, she has a chance of reviving. So she's actually quite good for that 2 pairings. Now, the main reason why I didn't use her in my other teams is she likes to debuff. So it's a very difficult way to avoid polymorph because she has a 2-turn here and she has an AoE decrease accuracy on a 50% chance. So it's a very high probability she's going to polymorph herself. But as a come in, place increase attack, and in Stone Skin, she's pretty good at this. And if you do need a revive, you can use it. Now, I probably will build personally something of this nature, either a Kimi Tomo. I might drop the Michinaki for like a Yoshi. But Yoshi, to be honest, might struggle in terms of sort of stone skinning and different things like that. So I might just use the Michinaki, not necessarily as a damage dealer or a debuffer, but just to try and get rid of buffs. You know, try to strip some of them away if we can. It's also pretty good if we can get a Hex out. He might be able to do some damage alongside it. I'm pretty sure I can build a Gembo that should be able to one-shot most things for that tournament. And I'm going to basically put all of my speed gear on Lady Kimi. Now, just before I end the video, I did say I would do an AoE tier list for you, and here is that tier list. So this is based off the updated damage equations that I'm working on. Hopefully, early part of this week, all the damage ratings should be back on hellhades.com for the way that we assess things. This is updated for 2023. So these champions are the ones that basically scale their multiplier to an extent where they become good damage dealers. Now, this doesn't mean that they're normally S tier amongst all of the champions in the game, because that would push a lot of these champions down. But this is particularly the rankings within just the Shadowkin faction. There is a mix of defense and attack-based champions here, some HP-based champions, and all of these are AoE abilities. There are some single target unique only champions, people like Umatogi, they only do single target. People like Gori do random or single target. They can hit quite well, but because of the lack of utility in single targeting, in the sense that they don't get any extra turns, or if they do, they just don't hit hard enough, or they don't block revive, it's going to be very difficult for you to activate them in a very limited option pool in terms of what can I put around them to keep them alive, right? You don't have as many options. So we've kind of excluded those and really just focused on the champions here that you can kind of like maximize. So what have we got here? Tatsu, surprisingly, is the best damage dealer in this faction outside of scaling Harima. If Harima scales, Harima will become number one. But if it was just sort of the first hit in battle, Tatsu is quite good, very high on that A2. As is Karato. Karato is a great option if you've got him. I still think Gembo's a little bit more flexible than Karato, purely because he has those buffs, so it gives him more budget. And it's a fair possibility that when I complete all the damage assessments, that actually Gembo will become higher than Karato, because we're going to give them a consideration for those bonus buffs that he's going to get in terms of crit rate and crit damage. If you have the crit rate buff and it's guaranteed, you can build more attack or more crit damage in your build because you don't need 30%. That roughly equates to around about 3 to 4 extra substat rolls that you don't need to have. Then we've got Nagorio, was once an epic fusion, very, very good damage dealer, as is Genzin, which YST will be really happy about. These are the best damage dealer options for you. Pick one of these to build your team around. Whether if it's defense based, you need to make sure you bring a defense buff, because Harima and Michinaki really requires like those defense buffs to go with it. There are a couple of defense buff champions in this, particularly Masamoto. If if you need a defense buff, either Kyoku or Masamoto would be the ones that I would go to, because you can activate them with extra bonuses, either a heal, or you can activate them passively, or you can activate them with a turn meter boost. Then we come to the A tier. Ninja is in the A tier, but he has a nasty habit of freezing, so he's automatically going to penalize all of your damage, but he's actually a great option if you don't have many of these other ones, as is Chinoro's A3 if you can get her to a significant enough position where you can reset that cooldown a lot. Nobel, surprisingly, is actually quite good, but most people probably fed the Nobel to make a +4 ninja. Now, the rest of these tier, I've put Lady Mikage down in B, mainly because she just doesn't have enough base attack, if that makes sense. Her base attack is quite low, so she does have decent multipliers, but the base attack doesn't allow her to scale as much. But you would probably use her more as utility, like stun or some of those various different things, right? She's got a lot of utility in her kit, so she probably, if you have her, is in your team as well. We've got Swarin here. Swarin's actually an AoE decreased defense, so she's an option if you need an AoE decreased defense if you don't have Michinaki. I actually don't even have a Swarin, which is quite frustrating. We do have a rare champion here, 2 rare champions in the B tier. It's Heritant, I can never say his name, and Odachi. But honestly, most people will either have Gembo or one of these S or A tier champions. I'm very surprised if none of you have any of these top champions here in some capacity. Even Gembo was a prime reward about 6 months ago, so a lot of people who were playing 6 to 12 months ago probably have a Gembo sitting either in the vault or not. There are some other legendaries down here, like Jingwon's at a D rank. He's HP based, you can't scale him. And Kimmy, actually, even though she's a support champion, has okay damage. But again, you would probably just build her for speed more than you would build her for damage, as you would Tomoe as utility. Oboro can scale quite well if you can get up to 4 debuffs on a single target. You could do some sort of reho into a Boro nuke strategy. If you do that, that's quite strong. But again, it's a single target on the rest of her abilities, so it's still quite tricky to get a sustainable kill from it. But that is the tier list there. That's what I would suggest people look towards building their teams around. Want someone from the S or A tier, you absolutely can build speed teams in the Shadowkin faction. Kimmy has an insane base speed of 115. Shujen would be absolutely top tier. And Yoshi teams surprisingly will catch people off guard. Remember, the strategy here is to win offensively. You don't care about defenses here, so you're going to be facing the normal defenses as usual, unless people were kind enough to put one-man defenses in. Let me know, guys, what you think about this sort of styled theme arena tournament as well, because I actually think more of this diverse change-ups is what we really want to see in PvP. You know, when Live Arena came out, most people said what they really wanted was sort of rule-based tournaments or rule-based settings where it was almost like you can only use epic champions, to try and shake it up a little bit. If we can't have champion balance, perhaps maybe we can have some tournaments that take those champions out of it for a limited time. It doesn't mean you have to nerf the champions, they're still relevant in every other thing, but these kind of tournaments that challenge you to build different teams, it makes it more interesting, certainly to me. But let me know, guys, what you think, or do you think this is just annoying? Do you just not want to have to do it? There is a champion training tournament going on as well, so if you need to build a champion for this arena tournament, it kind of aligns nicely with that. I will be building my team, and we'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll do a bit of testing on stream tonight when this video comes out, because I will be streaming on YouTube. But there you go, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.